The first thing my son said when he found me wasn't, "Dad, are you okay?" It was silence. Just silence. And the sound of him dropping to his knees on the concrete floor of my own garage, like someone had cut his strings. I was lying in the old army cot I'd dragged from the corner 3 weeks earlier. It smelled like motor oil and the particular kind of cold that settles into cement in February. My ribs hurt when I breathed too deep. Not broken, I didn't think, but bruised from where I'd slipped on the icy step 2 nights before and nobody had come to check on me. My son-in-law had heard the fall from inside the house. I know because I heard him laugh. "Dad." My son finally said my name like a question. Then he looked at the padlock on the door that led into the kitchen. The door of my own house. And something shifted behind his eyes that I hadn't seen since he was 19 and found out his college roommate had been stealing from him. Quiet fury. The kind that doesn't shout. "How long?" he asked. I told him 6 weeks. He didn't say anything else for a long time. He just sat down on the floor next to my cot, right there on the cold concrete in his good coat, and held my hand the way you hold the hand of someone you almost lost. Let me back up. My name isn't important. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years working as a structural engineer for the county, bridges, water mains, the kind of work that holds things up without anyone noticing unless it fails. My wife, Lorraine, passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I don't talk about those 11 weeks much. What I'll say is that it changed the math of everything. The house felt different. The mornings felt different. I had a pension that came to just over $6,000 a month. A paid-off house in a neighborhood I'd lived in for 22 years, and more silence than I knew what to do with. My daughter called about 8 months after Lorraine died. She'd been calling regularly. She's a good daughter, or I believe that. But this call was different. She had an idea, she said. She and her husband had been talking. The commute was killing them. Her husband's business was growing, and he needed a proper office space, and their apartment was too small now that they were thinking about starting a family. What if they moved in with me? Just for a while. She'd be their dad. She could cook. She could help with the yard. I wouldn't be alone in that big house anymore. I want to be honest about something. I was lonely. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. When your wife of 33 years is gone and your rooms are full of her absence, someone offering to fill that space sounds like mercy. I said yes. My son-in-law. I'll call him by the name he gave himself, which was always the man of the house. Even in my house, came with 2 things I didn't know about until it was too late. The first was charm. Not the warm kind. The efficient kind. He shook my hand at the door the day they moved in and told me he was going to take such good care of things. And he looked me in the eye when he said it, and I believed him, the way you believe a contractor who shows up on time and has a firm handshake. The second thing he brought was a plan. It started small enough that I almost didn't notice. He offered to handle the household bills. He was good with finances, my daughter said, much better than either of us, and he had systems. I handed over the account access. Then my pension direct deposit. Just easier, he said, to have it all flowing through one place. He'd handle the property taxes too, and the insurance, and the utilities. I felt taken care of. That's the honest thing to say about it. I felt like someone was finally managing the logistics of my life, so I didn't have to. What I didn't feel was the trap closing. I don't know exactly when I understood what was happening because it didn't happen in one moment. It happened the way a river erodes a bank, slowly, incrementally, and by the time you see the damage, the ground you were standing on is already gone. The first thing I noticed was that my debit card stopped working at the grocery store. I called the bank, and they said the account had been restructured. My son-in-law had moved my pension deposits into a joint account that required his authorization for withdrawals above $50. I thought there'd been a misunderstanding. I went home and asked my daughter about it. She said he was protecting me, that older people were targeted for scams, that this was for my own good. I asked her to look at me when she said that. She looked at the kitchen counter instead. By month 3, I'd stopped being a guest in my own home and started being an inconvenience. The guest room, my old reading room, where I'd kept Lorraine's books and her chair and the lamp she bought at an estate sale in 1998, had been converted into his office. Without asking, I came home one afternoon and her chair was in the garage. I stood there looking at it for a long time. When I brought it up that evening, he told me the chair was old and they needed the space. My daughter nodded. She didn't look up from her phone. I started sleeping in the guest bedroom. Then he needed that for clients, he said. He'd be having business associates come through, and he needed a proper room to offer them. I moved my things to the small room off the laundry. When I asked my daughter if this was really happening, she said I was being dramatic. That I had the whole house, practically. That I was always welcome anywhere. What she meant was that I was welcome anywhere he didn't currently need. The garage happened after I tried to withdraw money. I'd found out. From a neighbor of all people, a retired schoolteacher named Harriet, who had watched me move into my own house 22 years ago and had my number from when Lorraine was alive, that the power of attorney document my son-in-law had asked me to sign 8 weeks earlier gave him complete financial authority. Not emergency authority, complete authority. I hadn't read it carefully. I'd trusted my daughter when she said it was standard. When I confronted him about it, he didn't get angry. That's the part people don't expect. He sat back in his chair, my chair, the leather one from the living room, and he smiled. He said I was confused. He said this happens sometimes with older people, getting confused about what they'd agreed to. He said maybe I should see a doctor. I told him I was going to call a lawyer. He said that was fine, but that without a phone plan, he put my cell phone on his account 6 weeks earlier. As a convenience, he'd said, it might be difficult to make calls. He turned off my plan that morning. I didn't know that yet. I found out when I went to my room, and my phone showed no service. That night he told me the small room off the laundry was needed for storage. He said there was plenty of space in the garage. He said it with that same flat, reasonable voice. My daughter was standing in the doorway. She didn't say anything. I moved to the garage. I want you to understand the calculation I made, because people ask why I didn't just leave. The house was mine. My pension was being absorbed into his accounts. I had no access to cash, no working phone, no car. He convinced me months earlier to let him handle the insurance renewal, and somehow the coverage had lapsed and the DMV had flagged it and I hadn't driven since. I was 64 years old in February in a garage with a space heater that worked when it felt like it, and I had nowhere to go and no way to get there. Harriet knew something was wrong. She'd seen me carrying bedding to the garage. She started leaving food on the fence post, casseroles mostly, wrapped in foil, and pretending she hadn't. I don't know how to explain what that meant to me. It was the only kindness I had for 6 weeks, those casseroles. She also had a landline. I got to it one afternoon when my son-in-law was at a meeting and my daughter had gone to a yoga class. I walked across the yard in the cold and knocked on Harriet's door and asked if I could use her phone. She took one look at me. I had a bruise on my jaw from where I'd walked into the low shelf in the dark, weight I'd lost showing in my face. And she said, of course, take as long as you need. And she made me a cup of tea and sat at her kitchen table pretending to read a magazine while I called my son. He answered on the second ring. His name is Corbett. He's 38, lives 4 hours away, works in logistics. He's the kind of person who doesn't call you often, but when he calls, he means it. When I told him where I was sleeping, there was a pause that lasted maybe 4 seconds. Then he said, I'm getting in the car right now. Don't go back inside until I get there. He arrived at 6 in the morning. I was on Harriet's couch because she'd refused to let me go back to the garage. She'd made up the couch with Lorraine's kind of thoroughness, an extra blanket, a glass of water on the end table, and I had slept better than I had in weeks. My son didn't knock on the front door. He came to Harriet's first. He asked me if I was okay. He asked me to show him everything, tell him everything, go back to the beginning. He had a legal pad. He wrote down dates, amounts, descriptions. He asked me what documents I'd signed and when. He asked about the POA specifically, and here's what Harriet had already told me, and what Corbett confirmed from his own research on the drive up. A power of attorney can be revoked by me at any time, as long as I'm of sound mind. My son-in-law had gambled on the fact that I didn't know that. He gambled wrong. Corbett had called an elder law attorney from the road. She met us at a coffee shop 2 blocks from my house at 8 in the morning. Her name is something I'll keep private out of respect for her, but she was approximately 30 years old and had the kind of focus that made you feel like the room had gotten quieter when she walked in. She reviewed what Corbett had written on the legal pad. She asked me several questions. She had me sign a revocation of POA on the spot. 2 witnesses, Corbett and Harriet, who'd driven over in her bathrobe and didn't apologize for it. Then she made a call to someone at Adult Protective Services. What happened next moved faster than I expected and slower than I wanted. Those 2 things can both be true. The APS investigator came to my house that afternoon. I was with Corbett. My son-in-law opened the door with that same flat smile, and the smile lasted about 30 seconds before it became something else, something harder and less confident, when he saw the investigator's badge and then Corbett standing behind me like a wall. My daughter started crying in the kitchen. I don't know if it was guilt or fear or both. I still don't know, actually. The investigation took 11 weeks. During that time, Corbett moved into the house with me, his idea, not mine, and he wouldn't hear any argument about it, and my son-in-law moved out, which was made significantly easier by the fact that the attorney had filed an emergency motion within 48 hours that froze the joint accounts and restored my individual access pending investigation. That first morning, when I could walk to my own ATM and withdraw my own money, I bought breakfast at the diner on the corner, and I sat there for a long time after I finished eating, just sitting with the receipt in my hand. Corbett found Lorraine's chair in the garage. He brought it back inside and put it where it belonged, next to the window in what is again my reading room. He didn't make a thing of it. He just moved the chair, and then asked if I wanted coffee. I want to explain something about the POA because I've talked to people since who had no idea. I had no idea, and I think it matters. A power of attorney gives someone authority to make decisions for you, but it does not transfer ownership of anything. My pension was never legally his. My house was never legally his. What he did was financial exploitation of an elderly person, which is a crime in this state. More importantly, a POA signed by a person who is mentally competent can be revoked by that same person at any time by simply writing and signing a revocation document in front of witnesses. He had built his entire scheme on the assumption that I didn't know that. Harriet knew it. She'd looked it up when she first saw me carrying that bedding to the garage. The court date was a Tuesday in May. The judge was a woman who had the manner of someone who had heard every version of the story and found each one equally unacceptable. My son-in-law had a lawyer, a good one, and the lawyer spent 40 minutes explaining that this had all been a misunderstanding, a family matter, a difference of perspective. The judge did not appear moved by this. She ordered full restitution of every dollar that had passed through those accounts from my pension, 14 months of deposits, less documented household expenses that had to be accounted for. She imposed a criminal referral for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. She issued a no-contact order. My son-in-law walked out of that courtroom without looking at me. His lawyer touched his elbow and said something quiet. Outside the window I could see the parking lot, ordinary and flat in the May sun. My daughter sat in the back row the whole time and didn't testify for either side. Afterwards, she waited by the doors. I walked toward her, and she looked like she was about to say something. Her mouth opened slightly, the way it did when she was small, and had broken something and was trying to figure out how to tell me. I waited. What I felt in that moment was not anger. It was something more tired than anger. She closed her mouth. She walked to her car. I haven't heard from her since. Corbett took me to lunch after. He ordered the most expensive thing on the menu and told me to do the same and didn't let me pay. Halfway through the meal he said, quietly, that he was sorry he hadn't come sooner. That he hadn't known. That if he'd known. I told him he came when I called. That was enough. That was more than enough. I'm back in my house now, fully. The reading room is my reading room. The leather chair is in the living room where it belongs. Harriet came for dinner last Thursday and I made the pot roast that Lorraine used to make, from a recipe card in Lorraine's handwriting that I found in the back of a drawer, and it came out almost right. Not perfect. Close enough. I'm telling this story because when I was in that garage, I thought I was the only person this had ever happened to. I've since learned that's one of the things isolation does to you. It makes your situation feel singular, unreachable, too specific for help to find you. It isn't. The resources exist. The laws exist. A power of attorney can be revoked. An APS report can be filed by anyone, a neighbor, a friend, a person in a bathrobe who decides she's seen enough. If you're the one reading this from a cold room somewhere, or from a place that used to be yours, make the call. Any call. Harriet's number was always there. I just had to walk across the yard. I keep thinking about the chair. Not the courtroom, not the documents. Not the moment the judge's gavel came down. The chair. Lorraine's chair. The one she bought at an estate sale for $30 because she said it had good bones. When Corbett carried it back inside and set it by the window without a word. That was the moment I knew something had actually been restored. Not just a piece of furniture. Something harder to name. Here's what I've come to understand about what happened to me. And I don't say this lightly. It unfolded the way it did because of choices. His choices. My daughter's choices. And, I have to be honest, some of my own. I handed over trust before it had been earned. I signed documents I didn't read carefully because I wanted to believe the story I was being told. That's not weakness exactly. It's human. But it cost me 14 months of my pension and 6 weeks on a cot in February. And I've had to sit with that. What stopped it wasn't luck. It was character. Other people's. And eventually my own. Harriet didn't have to notice. She could have minded her business the way most people do, looked away from the casseroles left on the fence post, let whatever was happening next door stay next door. Instead, she paid attention. She looked things up. She had a landline, and she let me use it. That's what I mean when I say the first thing that saved me was someone else's decency. A quiet, stubborn insistence on doing the right thing even when it cost her something. She drove to that coffee shop in her bathrobe at 8 in the morning without a second thought. You don't manufacture that kind of character in a crisis. You either have it or you don't. And Harriet had it her whole life. Corbett had it too. But what he brought that morning was also something sharper. He didn't arrive with his fists, though I think part of him wanted to. He arrived with a legal pad and the presence of mind to call an attorney from the car. He understood, the way people who've actually thought about justice understand, that the most effective thing wasn't anger. It was evidence. It was knowing the law. It was being smarter than the person who assumed you weren't. My son-in-law had built his whole scheme on the assumption that I was too old and too isolated to fight back intelligently. Corbett dismantled that assumption in about 18 hours. And me. I have to count myself too, eventually. Walking across that yard to Harriet's door was the hardest thing I did in those 6 weeks. Not because of the cold. Because of the shame. The irrational, corrosive shame of being a 64-year-old man who'd let this happen in his own house. That shame almost kept me inside the garage. Almost. What got me moving was a small, stubborn conviction that I had not worked 31 years building things that hold up just to collapse in my own driveway. I've talked to people since who are in versions of what I was in. The situations are different. Different documents. Different relatives. Different lies. But the internal experience is almost identical. You feel too embarrassed to ask for help. Too certain the damage is permanent. Too exhausted to believe it can be undone. I want to tell you directly that it can be undone. Not easily. Not without cost. But the tools exist, and so do the Harriets, and so do the Corbetts. The first move is just the walk across the yard. Lorraine's chair is back by the window. The morning light hits it exactly the way it used to. That's enough for me.